For legal deals meant to keep things quiet, non-disclosure agreements sure have been making a lot of noise lately. The biggest stories, well, they have been those with women connected to President Trump. Porn star Stormy Daniels and former Playmate Karen McDougall, both of whom signed deals and took money to hush up their affairs with the married then-apprentice star. Daniels' deal was with Trump and his attorney. McDougall's was with the National Enquirer. Now, NDAs, as they're known, popping up with a golf buddy of the president's, Tiger Woods. Former girlfriend of Tiger's, Kirsten Smith, who hooked up with the golfer reportedly after his divorce, signed a non-disclosure agreement with Woods last year. No word on whether any money was exchanged. Now she wants to tell her story, which she insists is not disallowed by that NDA. But the question is it? And what exactly are the rules for when NDAs stick and when they don't? For more, we turn to Ira Gar. Gar, a matrimonial attorney who has had some very high-profile clients, some of whom had to deal with their own non-disclosure agreements. Among them, one Ivana Trump, the former wife of the now president. Ira, good to talk to you as always.
Good to talk to you.
Okay, so there's a bunch of different ways that I've heard that attorneys are trying to get around these NDAs. One is, hey, you wrote me a check, here's the money back, thanks but no thanks, I want to now tell my story. As a rule of thumb here, returning the money, is that sufficient enough to void the NDA?
It would not be, I don't think.
Okay, what about the argument that on the Trump leased agreement that there is, or more specifically with the attorney for Trump vis-a-vis Stormy Daniels, that there was no signature from Mr. Trump? How do you read that one, and how much of a case does Stormy Daniels have as to, hey, this was a document that hasn't been co-signed by all parties, and by the way, it was a document that was signed under duress?
I think she has a very reasonable argument. The agreement is sort of unusual. First of all, they use pseudonyms for the parties, and then there's a signature line where the president purportedly would have signed, and he didn't. So her argument is there's no contract, there's no written contract, and we're governed by the terms of a writing. There's no writing.
To that end, she claims that her reputation was harmed, and then that, in effect, unwinds the agreement and all bets are off. Give me the threshold, because part of this, Ira, as I understand it, is the narrow and the broad application of what you can and you can't talk about if it's not spelled out to the letter of the agreement.
Well, yeah, I don't know that hurting or not hurting someone's reputation is a ground to void an agreement. You have an agreement. And in the first instance, the question in her case is, do you have one? She's saying there's no signature. Now, from watching, the news, my understanding is that Michael Cohen said, well, he signed it as an agent of the president, but the president didn't know he was doing this. Well, if the president didn't know, he didn't have actual authority to sign for the president. So I think her strongest argument is there isn't a contract. The reputation stuff, I think, is window dressing.
What about the actual source of the money, the timing of the money? Again, in the Stormy Daniels case, the allegation is $130,000 that was paid out. It was paid out 2 weeks before the election, and it could have been an illegal in-kind campaign contribution. Does the source of the payment potentially void the non-disclosure agreement, or it doesn't matter? As long as she got the $130,000, it doesn't matter where it came from.
I wouldn't think it mattered where it came from. I mean, I assume if it was legal, that may taint the situation, say this is a tainted or an illegal contract. It's meant to be an illegal campaign contribution. But I mean, for example, if I paid somebody $100,000 to keep silent, or my mother paid for me, or my business partner paid for me, I don't know if it would make any difference if it was a properly signed agreement and the clauses contained in there are reasonable. It's a contract.
I always love to ask attorneys how they think other attorneys are doing. Mike Avenatti, the attorney for Stormy Daniels. I've talked to some who say the guy's brilliant, forget about all the free airtime he's getting, he and his client's case. Others say he's playing with fire here, and the one who paid the price would be his client. Do you believe he's put her exposure, or do you believe that at the end of the day, there's much more likely that his client's going to end up doing far better than she was before this whole story surfaced?
I don't know if she'll do better, but it seems to me from what I've seen, watching other attorneys, he seems to be acquitting himself very well. He's articulate, he's very presentable, he's thoughtful, and he's raised questions that make her look, I think, very good. He said she's given her story, and we're waiting to hear from the president, or we're waiting to hear from Mr. Cohn, and we have a seat there with silence. So I think he's handled it as well as he possibly could.
Finally, Ira, to me, the unspoken part of all this is, could there be a situation where one party says one thing, the other party says something else as to what is or is not privileged here or covered by the NDA, and then they get to go into discovery, and then that opens up who knows what of a hornet's nest of information that could even be more damaging to this president, for example, than even whether or not they had the illicit affair and everything attached to it?
Well, sure. I mean, that's why I assume the president's counsel wants to go into arbitration and keep it quiet, and why Mr. Avenatti wants to have disclosure, because the disclosure itself may be more embarrassing than anything incident to the agreement.
Interesting, and by no means have we seen the final chapter of this story written. Ira Gar, thank you so much.
Thank you. Always nice to talk to you.
When we come back, how bad science could be putting some good guys in prison. There is stuff that I'm going to tell you that you just took as fact. It turns out it's anything but. Stay with us.